The warehouse loomed at the edge of the ruined district like a scar across the skyline. Its roof had collapsed in places, but one corner stood tall, sharp against the pale evening light. From that jagged perch came death. Nobody saw the sniper. Nobody ever saw him. They only heard the echo of his shots and the chaos that followed. For months, soldiers had whispered about that nest, a fortress made not of walls, but of fear. Every attempt to reach it had ended the same way: failure. Drones sent overhead were plucked from the sky with inhuman precision. Helicopters never dared to hover for long, forced to veer off under the threat of fire. Infantry patrols tried advancing through alleys and crumbled roads, but none made it within 200 yards. Some never even saw the flash of the rifle. They only fell where they stood. The nest had become more than a position. It was a legend. Locals told stories of the ghost in the tower. Some swore he never missed, that he could shoot a coin off a rooftop 2 streets away. Others believed he wasn't human at all, but a phantom haunting the ruins. The soldiers called him Untouchable. Children whispered his name in games, running through broken streets, pretending to dodge invisible bullets. The warehouse itself became a symbol of dread, a forbidden zone no one dared to cross. From a distance, the building looked ordinary, just another casualty of war. Broken windows, rusted steel, walls scarred by fire. But once you knew what lived within its shadows, the sight carried weight. Even silence there felt dangerous, as if the air itself was waiting for a rifle crack. His city had adapted. Routes shifted around the warehouse, an invisible circle drawn around the sniper's domain. Supply trucks detoured for miles, rather than risk the intersection in his line of sight. Soldiers posted maps with thick black marks, warnings scrawled in bold ink, "Do not cross." Civilians learned to glance upward when walking, as though the sun might suddenly glare off a hidden scope. Everyone lived under the invisible eye of the nest. Attempts to kill him became stories of humiliation. One squad tried to sneak in under the cover of night, believing darkness would protect them. They never made it to the first checkpoint. His shot split the silence, and the survivors fled in terror. Another team tried a smokescreen. The wind betrayed them, carrying the fog away, and the nest claimed its toll before they could scatter. The longer it lasted, the more impossible it seemed. Commanders debated, analysts calculated, and strategists pored over blueprints. None found a solution. The sniper had every advantage: elevation, concealment, endless patience. From his perch, he commanded streets, alleys, even rooftops. To step into his domain was to invite death. And so the nest became eternal, or so it appeared. From the ground, looking up, the nest was barely visible. A sliver of shadow between beams, a faint suggestion of movement behind shattered glass. But anyone who dared to stare too long felt exposed. It was like standing under a storm cloud, knowing lightning would strike if you lingered. The people began to personify it. They called it the Eye, the Devil's Perch, the Watchtower. To the soldiers stationed nearby, it was simpler, the Untouchable nest. Yet behind every legend lies truth. The man in that nest was no phantom. He was flesh and blood, though his identity remained unknown. Rumors claimed he was a deserter, a former sharpshooter who turned rogue. Others said he was foreign, sent to destabilize the region. Some swore he had been a champion marksman before the war. Whoever he was, his skill defied belief. From inside the warehouse, he controlled his kingdom. His nest was more than a hiding spot. It was a carefully constructed fortress. Camouflage netting blended with twisted steel beams, rubble positioned to break silhouettes, escape routes mapped in case of intrusion. The angle of his shots had been tested, refined, perfected. He could see across blocks, through alleys, into courtyards. No one approached without being marked. The fear he sowed fled further than bullets ever could. Soldiers hesitated. Civilians avoided entire neighborhoods. Even animals seemed to sense the danger. Stray dogs wouldn't cross the street leading to the warehouse. Pigeons rarely perched on its roof. The building radiated menace, alive with unseen eyes. Every city has its unspoken boundaries, lines drawn in silence. Here, the line was sharp and unmistakable. Don't look too long. Don't walk too close. Don't whisper too loudly near the nest. The sniper didn't need to fire daily. Sometimes days passed without a shot, but the silence was worse. Because silence meant he was watching, waiting, choosing his next victim. And so, the myth deepened. Soldiers told each other that even tanks avoided the nest. That the sniper had a sixth sense, knowing when he was targeted before a shot was fired. That he could see through walls, through fog, through the hearts of men. Ridiculous claims, but in war, fear doesn't need logic. Fear feeds itself. Still, beneath the myths, hard reality lingered. Men were dying. Supply lines were blocked. The sniper wasn't just a phantom. He was a problem, an untouchable problem. The city adapted to his presence, but not everyone could accept it. Commanders fumed at their impotence. Families mourned. Those who had tried and failed. And among the ranks of soldiers and sharpshooters, whispers began. Someone had to end this. But the question was always the same. Who could possibly take the shot? The narrator lingers on this thought as dusk falls over the city. The warehouse silhouette cuts sharp against the dying sun, its edges jagged, its heart shadowed. Somewhere, inside, unseen, the sniper waits. His rifle rests on steel, steady and patient, eyes watching streets below. Every corner, every alley, every rooftop within range is his kingdom. Untouchable, for now. The whispers started long before he arrived. Soldiers in hushed voices spoke of a man who had been summoned, someone different from the rest. Locals passed rumors like secret currency, a ghost hunter for the ghost in the tower. Few knew his name. Fewer still knew his past, but everyone felt the same flicker of curiosity. Could this be the one? He arrived without ceremony, slipping into the city like smoke. No armored convoy, no grand announcement. Just a lone figure stepping off a battered truck, rifle case slung casually over his shoulder, eyes scanning the streets with a calm detachment. He moved like someone who belonged everywhere and nowhere, a man who carried his silence as heavily as his weapon. His name was Daniel Cross. The soldiers who first met him were underwhelmed. He wasn't the hulking figure they imagined, no larger than life. Hero. He was lean, almost wiry, his face weathered by sun and war, with eyes that seemed too still for a battlefield. Yet when he spoke, his voice carried weight, not from volume, but from certainty. "Show me the nest," he said. It wasn't a request. The commanders had been skeptical from the beginning. Cross was a former sniper, yes, with a record whispered about in certain circles. He had operated in deserts, jungles, mountains, always alone, always silent. But he wasn't officially on the roster anymore. He'd left the military years earlier, under circumstances nobody dared to clarify. Some said it was because of what he saw in the field. Others claimed he simply walked away, tired of pulling triggers that changed nothing. So why was he here now? That question hung in the air like smoke. Some whispered it was personal, that he had lost someone to the sniper in the warehouse. Others believed he had been ordered back, pulled from obscurity for one last mission. Cross himself offered no answers. He simply observed, studied, and planned. The first time he laid eyes on the warehouse, he stood in silence for a long time. The sun hung low, washing the broken district in amber. From their vantage point behind cover, soldiers pointed out where the nest supposedly was. There, one said, gesturing to the jagged rooftop. "He owns everything from that corner. You step past the third block, he'll see you." Cross didn't respond. He raised his binoculars slowly, adjusting them with meticulous precision. For 10 minutes, he didn't move, didn't blink, just studied the warehouse and the surrounding streets. When he finally lowered the binoculars, he said only 2 words. "He's good." The soldiers exchanged uneasy glances. Good was not the word they wanted to hear. They wanted beatable. But Cross wasn't here to flatter their hopes. For the rest of the day, he walked the perimeter. Not close enough to draw a fire, but close enough to understand. He studied the angles, the direction of shadows, the pattern of the wind cutting between buildings. Every alley, every broken streetlight, every shattered wall, he memorized them all. Some soldiers followed him, asking questions, hoping to glean insight. He ignored them. His focus was absolute, as if the rest of the world no longer existed. At one point, a sergeant tried to break his silence. "Look, with respect, no one's gotten close. We've sent squads, drones, air support, all dead ends." "What makes you think?" Cross cut him off with a glance. Not angry, not dismissive, just steady. "I don't think," he said softly. "I calculate." By nightfall, he returned to his makeshift quarters, a small, dimly lit room above a ruined shop. He unpacked his rifle. It wasn't standard issue. The weapon looked like it had been customized over years, scarred but reliable. Every piece told a story. The scratches on the stock, the worn grip, the hand-tuned scope. He cleaned it slowly, methodically, as if reacquainting himself with an old friend. On the floor around him lay maps, sketches, and notes. He drew diagrams of the warehouse, marking possible positions the sniper might use. He measured distances with a ruler, scribbling calculations in the margins. He even noted the times of day when the sun hit certain walls, when shadows stretched long enough to provide cover. Cross wasn't chasing luck. He was building inevitability. As the night deepened, memories surfaced. He remembered Afghanistan, the mountain ridge where he held position for 3 days without moving, waiting for a target who never appeared. He remembered the jungle, the endless rain that turned soil into mud, forcing him to keep his rifle dry with scraps of cloth. He remembered the city where a single mistake cost his spotter his life. Most of all, he remembered the day he left. The mission had been flawless, the shot perfect, but the aftermath had broken something inside him. The target wasn't a soldier, not really. Just a man in the wrong place at the wrong time. The war had demanded it, but his conscience had never recovered. He swore he'd never again raise a rifle, unless the shot meant something more than orders. And now, staring at the diagrams of the nest, he felt that familiar weight again. This wasn't about glory. It wasn't even about orders. It was about ending a shadow that had strangled an entire city. By dawn, his plan was taking shape. He hadn't revealed it to anyone, but the soldiers noticed his calm. Something about the way he carried himself made them believe, even if reluctantly. For months, the warehouse had been an impossible fortress. But here was a man who looked at it not as untouchable, but as a puzzle waiting to be solved. The locals, too, began to notice. Children followed him at a distance, whispering, pointing. Word spread that the silent stranger was going to challenge. The phantom in the nest. Some prayed for him. Others shook their heads, convinced he would die like the rest. But all eyes turned toward him. The legend of the untouchable nest had found its challenger. And for the first time in months, hope crept through the streets. Cross sat alone at the edge of the city, watching the sunrise paint the warehouse in gold. Through his scope, the nest looked calm, almost serene. But he knew the rifle inside was awake, watching, patient as ever. He adjusted his scope one last time, whispering to himself, "You're good," he said softly. "But everyone makes a mistake." It wasn't bravado. It was calculation. The challenger had arrived, and the game had finally begun. Daniel Cross became a shadow. From the moment he began his reconnaissance, he moved with the quiet assurance of someone who had done this before, countless times, in landscapes where silence meant survival. The city was his chessboard. Every alley and broken rooftop another square in a game played against death itself. The nest loomed ahead, invisible yet ever present, like a predator waiting for the smallest mistake. He didn't walk the streets like the others. He studied them. First, before his first step, he watched. He measured the sway of dangling wires in the wind, the broken glass that could betray his position, the cracks in the pavement where his boots might echo louder than they should. Only then did he move, and when he did, he vanished. The soldiers tried to follow at first. They wanted to observe, to learn from him, but within minutes they lost him. One moment he was slipping between ruined walls, the next he was gone, as if the city itself had swallowed him. They waited for him to reappear, straining their eyes, whispering among themselves. "He's still out there," one muttered nervously. "Where?" another asked. A third shook his head. "Everywhere." Cross navigated the ruins with predatory patience. He climbed where others crouched, crawled where others walked, froze when others would have rushed. Every window became an eye to peer through, every rooftop a vantage point to test angles. Through binoculars and his scope, he studied the nest from dozens of positions, never lingering too long, never revealing himself. The sniper inside the warehouse was not careless. Cross could sense it. The angles of fire had been perfected, not random. The nest had fields of view that overlapped, meaning there were kill zones, places where no one could hide. Soldiers had died there, and their ghosts lingered in memory. Cross marked them mentally. Here, exposed at 30 meters. There, no cover from the left window. That corner trap. The warehouse was more than a structure. It was a design. And he was deciphering it piece by piece. Hours passed. Cross remained still for long stretches, sometimes lying prone in rubble, so long that dust settled on his back. He watched for patterns. The sniper wasn't firing indiscriminately. He was disciplined, patient. Cross timed the intervals, noted how often the rifle cracked, how quickly the nest silenced again. He even marked how pigeons startled into flight when the gun fired, using the birds as natural alarms. The sniper was good, very good, but good men always left traces. Cross began to notice small details. The sniper didn't fire at random movement. He only took shots when he was certain. That meant discipline, but also meant confidence, bred predictability. If Cross could find the rhythm, he could exploit it. At one point, Cross edged too close. He had found a collapsed balcony 2 blocks from the warehouse, a vantage point high enough to test angles. As he raised his scope, the world sharpened into the jagged outline of the nest. And then movement, a flicker, a faint reflection of glass. Cross froze. The scope remained still. His breath halted. His heartbeat slowed until it was a dull throb in his ears. He knew. The sniper had seen something. Not him, not yet. Just a disturbance. Seconds stretched into eternities. A pigeon fluttered from a rooftop, wings beating like drums in the silence. Cross didn't flinch. His finger hovered near the trigger, though he had no shot. Then, slowly, the reflection disappeared. The nest went quiet again. Cross let out the breath he had been holding. Too close. 1 degree more, 1 moment longer, and he would have been another ghost claimed by the warehouse. He retreated, but not in panic. Carefully, deliberately. Every step calculated so as not to give away a trace. When he was 3 blocks back, He finally allowed his muscles to loosen. This was no ordinary opponent. This was someone who had mastered patience as well as skill. Good? Cross thrived on worthy challenges. At night, the city grew quieter, but the nest remained awake. Cross found a broken rooftop where he could see the warehouse silhouetted against the moonlight. He lay flat on the concrete, his rifle across his chest, eyes fixed on that dark corner. He thought of the stories. A phantom, a ghost, an untouchable god of the rifle. Myths were powerful, but myths were also cages. The more people believed the nest was invincible, the less they dared to test it. That was why the sniper still ruled. Cross wasn't interested in myths. Only angles, timing, and flaws. The nest had one. Every fortress did. The days blurred. He ate sparingly, slept in short bursts, lived in silence. His world shrank to the size of streets and rooftops, the warehouse. Always at the center, he mapped every approach, tested every line of sight. He counted his steps between cover, timed how long it took to move from one shadow to another. And slowly, a picture formed. The nest was strong, but not invincible. The sniper controlled long, open streets, but in doing so, he left blind spots. Near certain walls, Cross found one alley where the angle of the warehouse windows couldn't reach. It was narrow, dangerous, but possible. He discovered that at certain times of day, the sun hit the warehouse just right, throwing glare across the sniper's position. Tiny weaknesses, barely noticeable. But to Cross, they were everything. The soldiers noticed his absences. He returned. At odd hours, eyes sharp but face unreadable. They asked what he had found, but he only answered with silence. Still, they sensed something shifting. His notes grew thicker, his diagrams more precise. His movements carried a quiet confidence. The kind of confidence only earned by knowledge. One soldier whispered to another, "He's seen something." The other replied, "Then maybe the nest isn't untouchable after all." On the fifth night, Cross climbed the skeletal remains of a radio tower. From its peak, he could see the entire district spread below him. The maze of alleys, the crumbling roofs, the empty streets bathed in pale moonlight. And at the center, the warehouse. Through his scope, he watched. The sniper shifted slightly, just enough to reveal that he was human, not phantom. The rise and fall of a shoulder, the faintest outline of a rifle adjusting. Cross smiled faintly. "There you are," he whispered. For the first time, the ghost had a shape, but observation was only the beginning. To defeat the sniper, Cross needed more than knowledge. He needed opportunity, a mistake. A moment when the myth cracked and the man inside was exposed. That moment had not yet come. So he waited. The city whispered about the stranger who vanished into ruins each day and returned with dust on his clothes and silence in his eyes. Children pointed to rooftops, convinced they had seen him moving like smoke. Soldiers began to believe in him, though none dared say it aloud. And the sniper, somewhere in his nest, kept watching too. 2 hunters, 1 city. The shadows grew darker, the silence deeper. The observation was ending. The real game was about to begin. The city was quieter than usual. The night Daniel Cross spread his maps across the dusty floor of his quarters. A single lantern flickered, throwing shadows that stretched long across cracked walls. On the paper, the warehouse sat at the center, like a dark heart, veins of alleys and streets spiraling outward. Cross had walked every line, crawled every corner. Still, the nest loomed larger than the diagram suggested. He leaned over the maps, pencil tapping softly. Angles, distances, light shifts between morning and dusk. He had measured everything. But the question gnawed at him. Was it enough? The soldiers thought him infallible. They whispered outside his door, voices hushed in awe. To them, Cross was unshakable, a man immune to the same fears that paralyzed others. But they didn't see the weight pressing on him. They didn't see the ghosts that lingered when he closed his eyes. The failed missions, the friends who never came back, the faces of those he had killed. He knew what failure here meant. Not just another mark on a ledger, not just another squad lost. This failure would cement the myth forever. If he couldn't touch the sniper, no one could. That pressure clawed at him like invisible fingers. A knock broke his focus. The door creaked, and Sergeant Walker stepped inside. He was a broad-shouldered veteran with tired eyes, the kind of man who had buried more comrades than he could count. "You're pushing too far," Walker said, eyeing the maps. "I've seen men burn themselves out on less. You've been out there 3 days without proper rest." Cross didn't look up. He sketched another line, calculating the distance of a potential shot. "Sleep won't solve this," he murmured. Walker frowned. "You're one man against a ghost no one else has even touched. Don't pretend you don't hear the whispers. Some say you'll die in there, same as the rest." Cross finally lifted his eyes. Calm, steady. "Maybe, or maybe I won't." Walker studied him. There was no bravado in his voice, no arrogance. Just quiet certainty. That made it more unsettling. "You've got a plan, then?" "I've got possibilities," Cross replied. "But possibilities aren't certainty." "Not yet." When Walker left, silence returned. Cross sat back, rubbing his temples. He wanted to believe. He needed to believe. But belief wasn't enough in this game. The sniper wasn't a myth to him anymore. He had seen the movements, tracked the discipline, glimpsed the faint outline of a man through glass. This was no phantom. And that was worse. Because if the sniper was a man, then he was dangerous in ways myths couldn't be. A man could learn, adapt, and strike back. Cross closed. His eyes inhaled slowly, exhaled slower. The weight of doubt pressed harder. He remembered his spotter, how Mason had bled out in the mud years ago because of a miscalculation. He remembered the face of a boy no older than 16, caught in crossfire because Cross had hesitated half a second too long. He remembered the last shot he ever took before walking away from the military, the one that broke something in him. And now here he was, rifle in hand again. The next morning, he returned to the soldiers' outpost, where a crude table served as a command hub. Officers hunched over their own maps, red marks circling the dead zones where no one dared go. They looked up when Cross entered, their expressions a mix of hope and skepticism. Colonel Briggs, a grizzled man with a permanent scowl, gestured at the seat across from him. "Well, you've been crawling around the ruins long enough. What of you got?" Cross unfolded his map, overlaying it with theirs. He pointed at one alley. "Blind spot. He can't hit this angle. Too narrow for his line of sight." Briggs raised an eyebrow. "You're sure?" Cross nodded. "Sure enough." Another officer scoffed. "We've had sure enough before. Cost us good men." Cross met his gaze without flinching. Because they rushed. They tried to storm a fortress. "That's not how you kill a sniper." Briggs leaned back, studying him. "Then how do you kill one?" Cross's voice was low, deliberate, by becoming one. The room went silent. The officers exchanged uneasy glances, but none challenged him. Something in his tone carried weight, like he wasn't offering a theory, but stating a law of nature. Finally, Briggs grunted. "And what do you need from us?" Cross folded the map. "Time, space, and no interference." "Meaning?" "Meaning you stay out of the kill zone. No squads, no patrols, no distractions. If I'm going to do this, I do it alone." The officers didn't like it, but none could argue. Too many lives had already been lost. If one man wanted to take the risk, better him than another dozen. Briggs nodded reluctantly. Fine, but if you fail, I won't, Cross interrupted. For the first time, doubt wasn't in his voice. But when he left the command post, the silence returned, and with it the gnawing weight. Alone again, walking through rubble, he asked himself the question he refused to voice aloud. What if they're right? What if he failed? He pushed it aside, but doubts clung like shadows. The sniper was patient. What if he was even more patient? What if he anticipated every move Cross made? What if the blind spot wasn't a weakness, but a trap? The possibilities spiraled, each darker than the last. Cross forced himself to stop walking. He closed his eyes, steadied his breathing, and whispered the mantra he'd learned long. Go. Calculate. Don't speculate. Numbers, not fear. Angles, not doubts. Slowly, the spiral quieted. That night, he worked again. He drew not one plan, but 5. Each with contingencies, each with fail-safes. He rehearsed them in his mind. Like a chess match. Move here, counter there. Advance here, retreat there. If the sniper shifted positions, Cross would shift too. If he fell silent for too long, Cross would wait longer. It wasn't just about making the shot. It was about surviving long enough to take it. And yet, even as he sketched, he felt Mason's ghost beside him, warning him of missteps. He felt the boy's face staring back, accusing. He felt the weight of every failure pressing down, whispering that this would be no different. Doubts, always doubts. But doubts sharpened him. Doubts forced him to plan harder, to think deeper, to strip away arrogance until only cold precision remained. By dawn, his decision was made. He would move within the week. The longer he waited, the more the sniper would adapt. Already, he suspected the man inside the warehouse and noticed changes pigeons disturbed, shadows shifted. Too much observation risked exposure. It was time to act. Cross packed his rifle, folded his maps, and stood at the broken window of his quarters. The city stretched before him, hushed in the morning light. In the distance, the warehouse loomed, patient and silent. Cross whispered to it, as if the sniper could hear. You're not untouchable. Not anymore. His doubts didn't vanish. They never would. But now they were tools, not chains. And with that, the hunter prepared to become the hunted. The city was unnervingly still that morning. The wind had died, leaving alleys heavy with silence. Even the usual barking of stray dogs had faded. Daniel Cross took it as a sign. Days of observation had prepared him for this. His calculations were precise, his routes memorized, his contingencies layered like armor. Today, he would push closer. Today, he would test the nest. He checked his rifle one last time, fingers moving with mechanical efficiency. Chamber clean, scope aligned, trigger tension calibrated. Everything mattered. A single imperfection could spell death. He whispered under his breath, steadying his nerves. Breathe, watch, wait. And then he vanished into the ruins. Cross's path was deliberate. He slipped through a collapsed stairwell, scaled a fractured wall, and crossed rooftops. No one else dared to tread. His movements blended with the rhythm of the city pauses in shadows, crouches beneath twisted beams, silent slides across gravel. Every step was calculated to minimize noise. At last, he reached the collapsed balcony he had tested before. It offered a narrow angle on the warehouse. Dangerous, yes, but necessary. This was where he would fire the first test shot, not to kill, but to measure. He lay flat, rifle against his shoulder, scope trained on the nest. Through the glassy lens, the world sharpened. Broken steel beams framed the sniper's perch. Shadows coiled in corners. Somewhere inside, unseen, the ghost waited. Cross exhaled. His finger brushed the trigger. This was it. The shot cracked like lightning. The sound rolled through the ruins, echoing down empty streets. His bullet struck the corner of the nest, sparking off twisted metal. It wasn't a kill shot. It wasn't meant to be. It was bait. A question thrown across the battlefield. The answer came instantly. A flash, a report. The sniper fired back. The bullet punched into the wall inches from Cross's face, spraying him with dust and stone fragments. He didn't flinch. Instead, he shifted, rolling sideways into cover as another shot followed. The rhythm was fast, precise, merciless. The ghost had been provoked, and he was furious. Cross's heart pounded, but his hands were steady. He peered through a crack in the rubble, tracking the sniper's responses. Timing, speed, accuracy. Every shot was data, another piece of the puzzle. He had what he came for, but the danger wasn't over. The sniper was hunting now. Cross could feel the weight of those unseen eyes sweeping the ruins. The warehouse loomed, its windows dark and hungry. He knew better than to assume safety. Snipers didn't fire blind. They watched. They waited. Cross crawled backward, inch by inch, keeping rubble between him and the nest. He moved like water, flowing from shadow to shadow. Still, bullets snapped past him, kissing the air where he had been moments before. The sniper wasn't guessing. He was calculating too. Cross smiled grimly. Good, he whispered. It had been too long since he faced someone like this. At one point, he slipped into an alley and pressed against a wall. The silence was crushing. He could almost hear the sniper's breathing across the distance, the calm rhythm of another professional, locked in the same deadly game. Cross closed his eyes, counted slowly. 1, 2, 3. The next bullet came exactly when he expected it, chipping stone inches from his head. He noted the angle, the velocity. The sniper wasn't just firing to kill. He was firing to pin him, to test him. This wasn't just combat. This was conversation. I see you? I see you too? Cross ducked into a collapsed building, heart hammering but mind razor-sharp. Dust filled his lungs as he crawled through debris. He paused at a shattered window, scope scanning the warehouse. For a moment, he caught it, the faint shimmer of glass reflecting the sun. There, the sniper's position. Not exact, but close. Enough. Cross adjusted his rifle, exhaled slowly, and fired again, not at the sniper, but at the steel beam beside him. The bullet rang against metal, a sharp clang that echoed like a challenge. The nest erupted. Bullets tore through the building, ripping plaster and wood. Cross ducked, rolled, and sprinted deeper into cover. Splinters bit his arms, dust stung his eyes, but he kept moving. When the shooting stopped, the silence was deafening. Cross crouched in darkness, chest heaving. His mind replayed everything, every shot, every echo, every detail. The sniper's timing was near perfect, his accuracy lethal, but there were patterns, subtle hesitations, microseconds of adjustment when shifting targets. Not weakness, exactly, but human. And humans could be outplayed. He sat there for what felt like an hour listening. No more shots came. The nest had gone silent again, retreating into patience. The ghost was watching. Cross whispered into the shadows, not untouchable. When he finally withdrew, he did so slowly, methodically. He never turned his back to the warehouse, always moving sideways or backward, always keeping rubble between himself and the nest. By the time he returned to friendly lines, dusk had settled. The soldiers rushed to meet him, eyes wide. "You're alive," one said, almost disbelieving. "Barely," another added. Cross said nothing. He handed his spent shell casing to Walker, who stared at it like it was some kind of relic. "You fired," Walker muttered. "I tested," Cross corrected. His voice was calm, steady, but his eyes burned with intensity. And I learned. The men pressed him for details, but he offered none. They wouldn't understand. Only another sniper could grasp the subtle truths hidden in those exchanges, the timing, the patterns, the psychology. But inside, Cross knew. The ghost bled. That night, he sat alone again, rifle across his lap. His body ached, his ears rang from close gunfire, but his mind was alive. He replayed every moment, every fraction of a second. He wrote it down angles, response times, estimated distances. His notebook filled with numbers, calculations, sketches. For the first time, the impossible seemed possible. But he also knew something else. The sniper had learned about him too. Cross wasn't the only hunter taking notes. The next encounter would be different. The nest would be ready. The ghost would adapt, and so would he. As dawn broke, Cross stood at the window of his quarters, staring at the warehouse in the distance. The rising sun painted its jagged silhouette. In gold, somewhere inside, his adversary was watching, waiting. Cross smirked faintly. "Round one," he murmured. The nest had spoken. He had answered. The game was on. The warehouse loomed in the distance, jagged against the gray morning sky. For weeks, it had been a fortress of shadows, a place where death crouched unseen. Soldiers avoided even looking at it for too long, as if eye contact alone might draw. The sniper's bullet. But Daniel Cross stood at the window of his temporary hideout, staring unblinking. He wasn't afraid of the nest anymore. He respected it, studied it, hated it, and needed to destroy it. The impossible shot wasn't just about distance. It was about psychology, timing, patience. And tonight, he would prove it. Inside the dimly lit room, his rifle lay disassembled on the floor. Every piece gleamed from cleaning, oiled and polished with obsessive care. Cross sat cross-legged, his hands working in silence, reassembling each part with ritual precision. Bolt, barrel, scope, suppressor, each one clicked into place like a puzzle piece. For most soldiers, a rifle was a tool. For Cross, it was something else, an extension of his own body, a bridge between his will and the world. He whispered to it as he worked, murmuring small reassurances, the way others might pray. "You won't fail me. I won't fail you." On the table beside him lay notebooks filled with cramped handwriting and sketches. Angles of fire, wind measurements, bullet drop calculations. The city itself had become a problem to solve. Every rooftop and alley a variable. He traced lines with his finger, rehearsing routes, imagining possibilities. But math was only half the battle. The sniper in the nest wasn't just a target. He was a mind sharp and ruthless. Their brief exchange of fire had proven that. He wasn't simply defending his position. He was testing Cross, adapting to him. And that made this a duel. Cross had faced many opponents, but this was different. Most men could be broken by fear. Most could be baited into mistakes. But this ghost was disciplined, patient, as cold as the scope he peered through. If Cross made even the smallest error, he'd be dead before he hit the ground. That was the reality. That was the weight pressing down on him. And still, he prepared. The city outside whispered of his chances. Soldiers muttered that he was reckless. Civilians prayed he would succeed, but few believed he could. No one had ever come close. No one had ever even survived this long. At night, the whispers reached his ears. "It can't be done. The nest is untouchable." Cross lay awake, staring at cracked ceilings, listening. Their doubt didn't wound him. It steeled him. If no one believed, then the ghost wouldn't expect him to succeed either. Doubt was a weapon, and he intended to turn it. On the second evening of preparation, He climbed the highest rooftop overlooking the district. The city spread out beneath him like a broken chessboard. Streets, ruins, rooftops, and the looming warehouse. He carried no rifle that night, only his scope. He lay flat and watched for hours. The sun dipped, the light shifted, the wind changed. Every minute, he logged data. How shadows stretched across the walls. How reflections shifted as glass caught the last rays of sun. How the air cooled and the wind slowed as night deepened. He became part of the city, breathing with it, waiting with it. At one point, a faint glimmer in the nest caught his eye. The ghost was there, watching. Cross felt the weight of his gaze even from hundreds of meters away. He smiled faintly. "I see you too." By the third day, his body was exhausted, but his mind sharper than ever. He ran through breathing exercises, tested his focus under stress, even simulated the shot with dry runs. Each time he pictured the nest, the phantom inside, and the bullets slicing through air. He drilled until the process became instinct. The checklist etched into his bones. Breathe in. Exhale halfway. Adjust for wind. Correct for distance. Squeeze, don't pull. Do it enough, and the body obeys before the mind has time to question. But doubts still slipped through. What if the ghost anticipated him? What if the nest had hidden defenses? What if, at the final moment, everything unraveled? Cross stared at his reflection in a broken mirror. His face was gaunt, eyes hollow from sleepless nights. He barely recognized himself, but behind the fatigue, there was fire. Fear and doubt weren't enemies. They were fuel. They sharpened him, reminded him that failure wasn't an option. "This isn't about pride," he told the mirror. "This is about ending it." And he believed it. On the eve of the attempt, he prepared like a man going to war alone. His gear was minimal. Rifle, extra magazines, notebook, water. No backup, no distractions. Just him and the ghost. The soldiers gathered as he left. Some offered nods of respect. Others avoided his gaze, unwilling to watch a man march to likely death. Cross didn't care either way. Walker approached, gripping his arm. "You really think you can do this?" Cross's eyes didn't waver. "I know I can." It wasn't arrogance. It was conviction, born from weeks of obsession and preparation. That night, the city was alive with tension. Every window seemed to hold a shadow watching him. Every alley whispered caution. The warehouse loomed ahead, darker than ever, its silhouette jagged against the starlit sky. Cross climbed into position, heart pounding steady and strong. The rooftop was cold, gravel crunching faintly beneath his boots. He lay flat, unpacking his rifle, setting up his scope, checking every adjustment twice. The world narrowed. There was only him, the rifle, and the nest. He exhaled. "Tomorrow," he whispered, "you fall." The night swallowed his words, but the nest was listening. The hours crawled. He stayed prone, eyes locked through his scope. The ghost never revealed himself, but Cross knew he was there. Two hunters, separated by distance, locked in silence. He imagined the man in the nest preparing too, cleaning his rifle, checking his angles, waiting. They were mirrors of each other, reflections destined to clash. Cross allowed himself one final thought before sleep took him, shallow and restless. This isn't impossible, just unproven. And with that, he drifted into uneasy dreams of bullets cutting the night, of impossible shots landing true, of legends shattering. Tomorrow, the duel would begin. The city was silent, too silent. Even the usual hum of distant engines, dogs barking, or footsteps in alleys seemed to fade, as if the world itself knew what was about to happen. Daniel Cross lay prone on the cold rooftop, his rifle aligned. His body pressed flat against gravel that dug into his ribs. He didn't notice the pain. His mind had tunneled into a single focus: the nest. That cursed warehouse rooftop where shadows moved like phantoms. Somewhere inside, the ghost waited. Cross knew it. The man wasn't sleeping. He was awake, alert, and watching. Cross adjusted his scope. The crosshairs swept over the building, gliding past jagged steel beams and broken windows. The light was dim, the air thick with the chill of approaching dawn. A faint wind brushed his cheek, carrying the smell of smoke and dust. He made the adjustments automatically. 1 click left for windage, 2 clicks down for distance. His fingers knew the rifle better than his own heartbeat. Breathe in, hold, exhale slowly. Reset. The ritual steadied him, but the pressure was unbearable. He wasn't just aiming at a target. He was aiming at a legend. Below him, scattered groups of soldiers and civilians lingered in the streets, their eyes fixed on the warehouse. They knew Cross was somewhere above, preparing. Whispers floated up through the air. Can he really do it? No one's ever. Come close. If he misses, he's dead. Cross tuned it all out. None of their voices mattered. The only sound he allowed into his mind was the rhythm of his own breath and the faint ticking of his watch. The nest remained still, like a beast waiting to strike. The sniper inside had to know, had to feel it, just as Cross did. 2 predators sensing each other across the void, invisible yet undeniable. Cross imagined him, crouched behind cover, rifle aimed, finger resting lightly on the trigger, just as patient, just as disciplined, just as dangerous. This wasn't a shot against a building. It was against a man who had made himself untouchable. And tonight, one of them would fail. The minutes dragged, stretching into an eternity. Cross didn't move. Sweat beaded on his forehead, trickling down his temple. His cheek pressed hard against the rifle stock, his eye unblinking behind the scope. Every sound amplified. The faint crackle of a burning barrel in the distance, the creak of a rooftop beam settling, the slow thud of his own pulse. And it came. A flicker. For less than a second, a sliver of glass on the warehouse roof reflected. Light, the faintest shimmer, invisible to most eyes. But not to Cross. He locked onto it instantly. The ghost had shifted. Cross's heart pounded, but his breathing remained steady. This was the window, the fraction of a moment he had been preparing for. He ran the numbers in his mind faster than thought. Distance, 1,140 yards. Wind, 3 knots northeast. Elevation, roof angle -2 degrees. Target exposure, less than a second. The ghost knew better than to show himself fully. Only a glimpse, only enough to bait or to see. But Cross didn't need more. He lined the crosshairs on the shimmer, adjusted for movement, and waited. The silence deepened. Time slowed. Cross felt his heartbeat echo in his fingertips. The world shrank to the space inside his scope, the thin cross intersecting at a single impossible point. The ghost shifted again, barely a whisper of movement, a shadow aligning his own rifle. Cross could almost see him. The faint outline of a scope, the slightest curve of a helmet. The duel had arrived. Cross exhaled, held, and let the universe pause. Then he squeezed the trigger. The rifle bucked against his shoulder with a soft, controlled recoil. The suppressed shot was little more than a whisper in the night, a deadly breath carried on the wind. The bullet leapt into the darkness, slicing through air, bridging the impossible distance in less than a second. Cross didn't blink. He followed the path, imagining it, feeling it, living it. The city seemed to hold its breath. And then impact. The shimmer of light vanished. A sharp crack echoed as glass shattered. The warehouse roof shuddered, and a figure toppled sideways into the shadows. the silence broke. From the streets below came a ripple of gasps, then shouts. Soldiers raised binoculars. Civilians pointed. Voices overlapped in disbelief. He hit him. No way. Did you see that? He actually hit him. Cross stayed locked in place, his scope steady on the nest. Smoke drifted from the rifle barrel, curling in the cold air. He didn't celebrate, didn't move. The ghost might still be alive. A shot like that could wound, could graze, could miss vital organs. Cross knew better than to assume. He waited. Seconds crawled into minutes. The nest remained still. No counterfire. No shifting shadows. No return shot. The rooftop where death had reigned for weeks was silent, broken, empty. Finally, Cross let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. His muscles trembled with release, his body screaming from the tension. But his mind was calm, sharp, unwavering. He had done it. The impossible shot had landed. Below, the city erupted in noise. Soldiers cheered. Civilians cried out in relief. For the first time in weeks, the streets rang with joy instead of fear. The untouchable had been touched. The ghost had fallen. But for Cross, the moment wasn't triumph. It was confirmation. Proof that preparation, patience, and discipline could pierce even the strongest legend. He lowered his rifle slowly, deliberately, as if putting down a sacred instrument. His hands shook, but not from fear, from release. The weight he had carried for weeks was finally gone. Yet as he packed his rifle and rose from the rooftop, he couldn't shake the thought. Somewhere in the shadows of that warehouse, a man just like him had fallen. A predator, a professional, a soldier who believed himself untouchable. Cross had won, but it wasn't victory he felt. It was respect. Respect for the duel, respect for the silence, respect for the man who had tested him more than anyone ever had. And as dawn broke over the city, painting the ruins in gold, Cross whispered to himself, legends bleed, even ghosts. The shot still echoed in Daniel Cross's mind, long after the sound had faded. For a moment, the city had gone silent, as if stunned by what had just happened. Then the silence had cracked, replaced by a tidal wave of noise. Soldiers shouted. In disbelief, civilians screamed with joy, and voices carried across the broken streets like rolling thunder. But Cross remained on the rooftop, motionless. His eye lingered on the scope, studying the warehouse rooftop. He searched for movement, any flicker of resistance. Nothing stirred. No counterfire, no shifting shadows, no phantom waiting in ambush. The nest was dead. Cross exhaled slowly, letting his lungs empty, letting his pulse return to normal. The tension that had held him captive for hours drained away, leaving his body heavy and weak. He lowered the rifle with deliberate care, as if setting down a sacred object, and lay back against the cold rooftop. Gravel pressed into his spine. The sky above was paling, the first hints of dawn painting thin streaks of gray-blue across the horizon. He didn't celebrate. He didn't smile. Victory, in moments like this, never felt like triumph. It felt like relief. Below him, the city changed. The people who had been prisoners in their own homes spilled into the streets, cautiously. At first, then in growing waves of relief. The fear that had haunted them, the untouchable nest, the sniper who could strike without warning, was gone. Whispers spread quickly, turning into shouts. He's down. They got him. No one's untouchable. For weeks, the warehouse had been a symbol of terror. Now, with a single shot, it became a symbol of hope. Soldiers gathered near the warehouse perimeter, weapons raised, moving carefully. They expected traps, mines, booby traps laid by the fallen ghost. But no shot greeted them. No resistance met their approach. They climbed the shattered staircases and found him where he had fallen, sprawled against the cracked rooftop tiles, his rifle clutched loosely in death's embrace. The legend was gone. The myth of invincibility lay broken beside a pool of blood. Cross didn't join them immediately. He stayed on his rooftop, staring into the distance, breathing slow and controlled. A strange heaviness pressed on his chest, not of exhaustion, but of reflection. The man he had killed, who had been he? A soldier? A mercenary? A believer in a cause? Or just another professional doing his work? Cross had faced many enemies in his life, but none like this. None who had tested him so completely. In another time, another place, maybe they would have been allies, maybe even friends. But on this night, only one could walk away. Finally, Cross packed his rifle into its worn case and slung it over his shoulder. His boots scraped softly as he descended from the rooftop. By the time he reached street level, the people were already searching for him. Soldiers craned their necks. Civilians scanned the rooftops. They wanted to see the man who had done the impossible. When he stepped into view, whispers followed him like a wave. That's him, the one who made the shot. The ghost killer. Cross ignored the voices. He walked steadily, calmly, his face expressionless. He wasn't here for recognition. He was here to finish the mission. At the warehouse, soldiers parted for him instinctively, as if sensing he carried a weight none of them could understand. They led him up the stairs, past the bullet-scarred walls and shattered glass, until he reached the rooftop. There lay the fallen sniper, the man who had ruled the city with fear, a man no one dared to touch. Cross stood over him, studying the face. It was younger than he expected. Hard eyes, sharp jaw, but still young. A man who could have lived another life, had war not claimed him. Cross felt no hatred, only respect. He knelt beside the body and studied the rifle. Custom-made, balanced perfectly. This had not been a weapon of chance. It had been crafted for precision, for control, for mastery. Cross ran his hand along its stock and felt a strange kinship. This man had been no monster, no phantom. He had simply been the mirror image of himself. A professional who lived in the shadows, shaped by discipline, patience, and duty. The city had built him into a legend. Cross had been forced to break that legend. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like inevitability. The soldiers cheered. They raised fists, shouted his name, and clapped his back. They saw triumph, liberation, glory. But Cross saw only the thin line that separated life from death. Today, he lived. Tomorrow, it could be another like him. Another untouchable nest. Another ghost waiting with a scope in the dark. He walked away from the rooftop, leaving the soldiers to claim the spoils. He didn't need to be remembered. The city would tell its stories, would exaggerate, would make him into something he wasn't. That was how legends were born. And legends, he knew, were dangerous. As dawn broke fully, Cross found himself standing on a hill overlooking the city. Smoke curled from chimneys. Sunlight painted gold across broken glass and crumbling walls. For the first time in weeks, the streets were alive. Children laughed, families embraced, soldiers lowered their weapons. The nest no longer loomed over them like a shadow. He thought of the man who had built that nest, who had made himself into a ghost. Did he know, in his final moments, that he had become more story than man? Did he believe in his invincibility? Or did he, like Cross, understand the truth? That no one is untouchable. Cross sat on the hillside, resting his rifle across his lap. He didn't look like a hero. His face was tired, his hands scarred, his eyes heavy with memory. But to the people below, he was already something else. They would remember him as the man who had taken the shot no one believed could be made. They would tell his story in bars, around campfires, in hushed whispers. The details would change, the distances would grow, and soon the truth would blur into legend. Cross knew this was inevitable, and he accepted it. As the sun climbed higher, he whispered to himself, a quiet truth no one else would hear. Legends bleed, even ghosts. The words carried on the morning wind, lost to the city's rising noise. Cross rose, slung his rifle over his shoulder, and walked away from the hill. He left behind the warehouse, the rooftop, the nest, and the man who had mirrored him. But he carried the weight forever. Because in the end, victory wasn't about celebration. It was about survival. And survival always came at a cost.